Welcome to Press TV Spotlight. I'm Marzia Hashimi. Thanks so much for being with us. One day has passed since the United States' terrorist attack on Venezuela and the kidnapping of its president and first lady. Outrage is being expressed by people around the world as demonstrations are taking place from South America to Australia to Europe and beyond to demand that President Nicolas Maduro and his wife Celia Flores be returned to Venezuela and that the United States is condemned for its terrorism. Condemnations are coming from many countries around the world, while most American allies remain silent about the U.S.'s terrorism. What is next for Venezuela? Stay with us as we take a look at all of this on this Spotlight. But first, let's take a look at the following.
In a dramatic climax to months of threats and pressure tactics by Washington, the United States launched a major attack on Venezuela in the early hours of January 3. U.S. forces bombed military and civilian infrastructure in the capital Caracas and other parts of the country and kidnapped Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his wife. The aggression sparked condemnation from across the globe for breaking international law. Iran slammed the U.S. attack as a blatant violation of Venezuela's national sovereignty and called on the UN Security Council to act immediately to halt the unlawful aggression. Russia expressed deep concern, saying there was no tenable justification for the attack. China also strongly condemned the United States' use of force against a sovereign country and its president. The Spanish premier said Madrid will not recognize an intervention that violates international law and pushes the region toward a horizon of uncertainty and belligerence. Meanwhile, the French foreign minister said that the operation contravened the principles of non-use of force, noting that no lasting political solution can be imposed from the outside. In Latin America, major regional powers slammed the U.S. kidnapping of Maduro, with the Brazilian president stating that Washington crossed an unacceptable line. The Cuban president labeled it as state terrorism against the brave Venezuelan people and said that the region is being brutally assaulted by the United States. Mexico, Colombia, Guatemala, and Uruguay also issued condemnations against Washington's military intervention. The overnight attack triggered protests across the world, including the U.S., Venezuela, Argentina, France, Italy, Greece, and Japan, with people decrying U.S. imperialist actions.
The U.S. imperialists have gone too far. They have attacked the heart of Latin American resistance. They have attacked the Venezuelan people and kidnapped Maduro.
We are here because we want a Venezuela free from the colonialist aggression of the United States, which is acting solely for economic profit.
The bombs on Venezuela are an illegal and criminal act in violation of every norm of international law. In reality, the United States wants to return to seizing Venezuelan resources, starting with oil and continuing with mineral resources.
In the U.S. itself, Democratic lawmakers lambasted the administration for what they called an unjustified and illegal attack on Venezuela, arguing that it was carried out without congressional approval. Newly elected New York Mayor Zohran Mamdani also voiced his opposition to what he called a pursuit of regime change in Venezuela. The UN Security Council is set to hold an emergency meeting on Monday to address the aggression and its implications for international peace and order.
Please raise their hand.
Well, I'd like to welcome guests to the program. Don DeBar, activist and commentator out of New York. And Daniel Shaw, professor of international affairs at the City University of New York. Thank you both for being with me. Good to see both of you. Starting it off with Don. Don, I mean, it's so mind-boggling. But what do you think are the main reasons, the real reasons for the U.S.'s invasion of Venezuela and the kidnapping of its president?
Okay, so we're here in the United States trying to figure out exactly what the hell we're looking at. This is, now 10 years, really, since 2015 when Trump started to rise in the polls, along with Bernie Sanders and everything that played out with that. And it's been my guess, I can't really say we lost anything, more strong than that, that Trump represents some faction of the ruling circles here that would prefer not to be as adventurous at the moment with Russia and China as the Obama administration and Biden administration, whatever that was, had been, say, in places, particularly Ukraine, but also South China Sea and Korea, elsewhere, but rather would have everyone, or particularly the United States, consolidate their power and control of the Western Hemisphere, where we had seen first Cuba, then Chile for a while, then Venezuela, Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, a whole bunch of independence movements and independent multilateral organizations springing up. They want to corral that in. And so it seems that what's happening, at least on surface, is that there's some kind of a tacit agreement the U.S. is going for and perhaps acquiring, I don't know, where you guys stay out of our backyard and we won't, stampede through yours. That may be what's motivating this. Certainly you have the individual players, Rubio, Gusano from, excuse the term, but he's a child of people who ran out of Cuba just ahead of the revolution, and grew up in a culture of people that were the comprador class in Cuba before that. Job one is to take back Cuba for the Cuban elite. And we had before that Bolton. So all of that is what's going on, I think, in the immediate sense.
Okay, well, let me get Daniel in this conversation. Okay, Dan, you heard what Don said. Let's look at some of this, what he's saying, because when he talked about it's as if you stay out of my backyard and I'll stay out of your backyard. Your thoughts on that? Because I believe that he's alluding to China and Russia. Let's hear your perspective on that. Do you think that there's something going on here between China and Russia and the United States and just basically allowing this to happen in the way it is? Or were they caught off guard and they didn't expect the United States to act in this way?
Greetings, Marzia and Don. Don raises some very interesting critical points. No one could have been caught off guard, Marzia. They built up a troop presence of some 20,000 troops, the Pirates of the Caribbean. It took some 200 U.S. military jets and helicopters to carry out this illegal invasion and kidnapping of Celia Flores and Nicolas Maduro, executed from some 20 bases. So it's important to say that the Dominican Republic and the sellout president Luis Abinader, as well as the Panamanian right-wing president, all of their bases were used. Some bases were used in Colombia as well, even though Gustavo Petro has decried this. If this thesis were true, then we would think there would be some waning down of the Ukrainian affair, of the proxy war through Ukraine against Russia. But up to this far, that battle is raging on. It continues to be a proxy war on Russia's geopolitical strategic interests. Russia knew what was going to happen, and besides issuing strongly worded denunciations, same as the Chinese, they really haven't done anything. Nothing short of full Russian military involvement, or perhaps the armed forces of Colombia or Brazil, which wasn't going to happen. Gustavo Petro and Lula never indicated that it would. But that may have been the only thing that would have even potentially got Trump's attention. So Nicolas Maduro knew this was going to play out. I think we can't just focus on the military theater. We also have to look at the moral victory right now that the Venezuelan people, with their leadership, with Nicolas Maduro, are winning, because we saw him defiantly, triumphantly saying Happy New Year's with his usual jovial character. So I think the Venezuelan leadership, the Bolivarian leadership, is operating on a whole nother level. Perhaps it harkens back to the Martin Luther King strategy in the South, where they knew that they were up against a superior military foe, but that they could win in other moral ways.
Okay. Well, Don, I mean, former Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez was extradited to the U.S. in 2022 and for allegedly facilitating the smuggling of 400 tons of cocaine, and was serving 45 years in prison. So on the one hand, Trump started accusing Maduro of drug trafficking. At the same time, he pardons Hernandez. I mean, what was that about? And does that just highlight the U.S.'s hypocrisy, or is there something else behind this?
Well, it is about drugs. It's about the most addictive drug facing the American public and a good part of the rest of the world, which is oil. The United States is addicted to other people's oil. And like junkies, they break in the night if they can, and right through the front door if they have to, and walk off with whatever they can do. If the TV cameras are there, all it does basically is tell the next group, leave the drugs out on the table when we come in and we won't break anything. Seriously, let's go back to the former president of Venezuela, according to the United States, Juan Guaido. We have like a couple of executive orders, one from Obama in 2015 and one from Trump in 2019. Prior to Trump's executive order, the U.S. recognized Juan Guaido in March of 2019 as the legitimate president of Venezuela. He couldn't go anywhere. He went out in a pizza place in Caracas, for example, and people started slapping him around. But he came to New York and he started signing documents. He suddenly owned all of Venezuela's gold in the Bank of England and elsewhere in the world, and started transferring ownership of it until that was stopped. He owned Citgo on behalf, or sold off Citgo stock until that was stopped. He spent a few $100 million of Venezuela's money. And, you know, when you spend somebody else's money, you're writing a check out to somebody. There were payees on these checks. He essentially was propped up in order to steal the resources of Venezuela, the ones that weren't in the country because they didn't want to go in there at that time and fight the Venezuelan people, which is what they're about to end up having to do. But they decided they would get this guy out and have him sign a bunch of papers. This has been a project since they lost control of Venezuela's resources with the election of Hugo Chavez back in 1998. He took office in 1999. It's been on the front burner through the Bush administration, the Obama administration, the first Trump administration, the Biden administration, and again with Trump. So,
yeah, well, okay,
Trump,
all right, that's a good point. All right, that's a good point you just made, Don. Let me get Dan, you're back in on this. Dan, I mean, let's look at that, because a lot of times it's being formed as, you know, this is Donald Trump and he's just out of control. But isn't the reality that this is the U.S.'s policy, that there is a difference perhaps with Trump because perhaps he's more honest than the rest and he will say it's for the oil, whereas others may say it's for human rights or whatever. But isn't the reality is this is just a continuation of what the U.S. does, and it doesn't matter if it's an Obama in the White House or Biden or Trump. They may carry it out in different ways, but basically this is what an imperialist entity does, and this is what the United States continues to do.
The tactics may have changed, but it's always been the same strategy, and that was to topple any dignified sovereign people's representation in Caracas. The war against Venezuela did not begin yesterday. It didn't begin in September with the illegal unilateral criminal bombing of Venezuelan, Colombian, Trinidadian, and Ecuadorian fishing boats. The war began in 1998, the moment that Hugo Chavez won the election, the moment that there was what we called at the time the pink tide and all of this Bolivarian momentum. They had to seek to disintegrate this Bolivarian project. The Venezuelan revolution of 98, of 99, has been the spearhead of this entire Bolivarian momentum. We saw what happened in Bolivia in August. Nicaragua and Cuba, if Venezuela goes, this is gonna leave them more isolated than ever, more vulnerable to U.S. economic coercive measures. And the true fear of Venezuela was the relationship that Venezuela had with Iran, with the non-aligned nations, with the BRICS nations, with Russia, all of the investment that was coming from China. Every time that I was in Caracas, I would see more and more diplomats from these other countries. And the United States sees this as its backyard. Certainly Trump's tactics have been more colonial, naked, raw, force and aggression. But Obama, Biden, none of them were innocent. Don laid out all the different types of ways that they have starved and waged war on the 30 million people of Venezuela. We have to say that the millions of Venezuelans who were forced to leave their country were involuntary immigrants, so migrants forced out by these coercive economic measures. So we have to analyze every iteration of this hybrid imperial war against the Venezuelan people.
Right, indeed. Well, Don, in 2002, the U.S. was involved in an attempted coup on President Hugo Chavez. And, of course, he was detained by the counter-revolutionaries. And but because of the revolutionary people of Venezuela, they were able to pressure and get him released. Now there are currently demonstrations around the world demanding the release of Maduro. How effective do you think that these protests can be? And do you think that they can result in his freedom?
First of all, before I go there, I just want to say to you and Dan, to ask basically, is Trump now the new, Jack Sparrow? You talked about him being a pirate of the Caribbean. What happened in April of 2002, actually, they didn't just detain him. They took him out of the presidential palace into a helicopter where they were contemplating pushing him out. Mm-hmm. On the ground, the people of Caracas surrounded the presidential palace and essentially started to gather rope and such for the leadership of the military that had betrayed the government, declaring essentially that this is not going to end well for you if you don't bring him back immediately. So they did. And so a couple of people were prosecuted in one fashion or another, and the military was reorganized as such. The people have been organizing themselves to prepare for this eventuality in the 23 years, almost 24 years since. And so, Trump can talk about sending in troops or whatever other device they have where they're going to declare war on the country itself physically. They're going to send home body bags from Venezuela. The U.S. government under Jack Kennedy knew better after the Bay of Pigs to try to invade Cuba because they understood what the Committees for the Defense of the Revolution meant, that the Cuban people were organized for self-defense. In Venezuela, they've studied that model, and they've had 20-something years to develop their response. They will fight back, and it'll invoke in many people's minds Vietnam. You will have back the Vietnam syndrome that they talked about years ago.
Right. Well, Dan, what about that? Daniel, what about that? What do you think is the plan by the United States? Because basically the infrastructure, the Bolivarian Revolution is still intact. One individual, the wife and his wife were taken away. But in general, the revolutionary perspective is still basically in charge of the day-to-day affairs. So what's next? How do you see this continuing from here? Where does it go from here?
The Trump administration has no actual plan. It sounds like they haven't even conferred with their own intelligence departments, because what they have is arrogance. Venezuela is a massive, massive country, about 1.5 times the size of Texas, a little bit bigger than Alaska. It's a rich, rich country with vast natural resources, as we know. The Trump regime is going to be focused on the big pockets and the Bolivar state, and in the other states with Maracaibo, with the highest concentrations of oil. They will be trying to set up some type of impenetrable fortresses like the green zones that we saw in Baghdad. There's no way they could try to assert military or political hegemony across the country, or it would spiral into a type of Ho Chi Minh, General Nigel Vo Giap, what the Vietnamese taught the U.S. colonizers 2 generations ago, that they can never win at a protracted people's war. So I think the resistance will be popular resistance. It'll manifest in many different ways. People are already in the streets. But I don't think that the Venezuelans are looking for a military victory. How can they defeat U.S. imperialism, the strongest military in the history of humanity, with all of the support and links to the Mossad and the Israeli intelligence, and of course, the other Western capitalist democracies, Germany, England, France primarily, the collective capitalist West militarily? How could the Venezuelan people's militias, even though there's 5 million people in those Chavista militias, but they can win on political ground, they can win on moral ground, and I think that's what we're going to see in the upcoming weeks. The main plan of the CIA and the Trump regime is to break the unity of the Chavista forces. The vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, is very strong. Ivan Hill, the Secretary of State. These are all well-trained anti-imperialist politicians who are not going to sell out, and that's why the Trump regime became so frustrated and had to ultimately act in this way. They wanted to get him out like Assad and offer him safe passage. Marco Rubio spoke about it publicly, but Nicolas Maduro was far too patriotic, Bolivarian, and intelligent for that.
All right. Well, Don, I mean, when we look at this situation, obviously the United States is a declining empire. And when we look at this latest terrorist attack against Venezuela, this is not a sign of Washington's strength. Many would say it shows the weakness and the desperation of this empire. I mean, how do you see it in general that, I mean, no longer are there any veils in trying to fake, actually trying to help the people, trying to bring democracy? It's just straight out imperialism and wanting to control the natural resources. I mean, how do you see it?
The last statement that you made, I agree completely with. That's exactly what this is. The other part, though, I'm concerned about. I remember back when I was young, and people would talk about the condition of the empire at that moment in time, and the rising socialist bloc back in the 60s and 70s, and the inevitability of the success of communism. That it sounded actually anti-Marxist in its determinism, almost, or say not even almost, metaphysical in its form. People have to be the actors in this. This empire appears to be declining. Certainly, there's an internal dynamic at work that is a constant pull towards its death. But humans are agents in this, and they have played the death tone many times before. It requires it being pulled down and taken out. It's not going to happen on its own. And so that means people need to be organized first in self-defense, because it needs to feed in order to survive, and it feeds on us. And so if we deprive it of our blood and sweat and everything else that it consumes of us, that it will go a long way towards putting it towards its final resting place.
Okay, stay with me, Don. I'm so sorry. I'm almost out of time. I just want to get Daniel in on this last part, picking up on what Don has said. What does it take? Do you think the people of the world are ready to sacrifice what they would have to stop this hegemonic entity? Because, as he said, it takes blood, it takes sweat, it takes sacrifice.
Yeah, U.S. unipolarity, at least in a military sense, with the Holocaust that continues to play out in Palestine, with the invasions of Haiti, of Venezuela. But in an economic sense, China continues to rise, the BRICS nations. But in terms of a military confrontation over Taiwan, I mean, look at how the Russians are hemorrhaging, bleeding out because of this proxy war in Ukraine. If there was a strong Russia unencumbered by this proxy war, certainly Russia would have done more. But this is a waning empire, as we know, but that doesn't mean it's not going to be very brutal and bloody. It's exit out of the world.
All right. On that note, thank you both for being with me. Don DeBar, activist and commentator out of New York. Daniel Shaw, professor of international affairs at City University, also out of New York. A pleasure talking to both of you. And as always, viewers, we appreciate you being with us on another Spotlight. I hope to see you right here next time. Goodbye.